Right then guys, it's PSL here and I'm here for another video on Formula 1 2003. However, this isn't a reverse grid video. Instead, what I'm about to talk about and show you is as interesting as it is enigmatic. If you've ever played Formula 1 2003 before, then you may have wondered why I've been choosing what the weather will be for each reverse grid race, rather than just using the game's forecast weather option. The forecast option, for those who don't know, is just a random and dynamic weather option. The one thing I think Codemasters have always excelled at with their F1 games is the weather system. Partly because races can go from dry to wet or vice versa, or they can go from dry to wet to dry again. The weather system is very interesting and dynamic. Compare that to Studio Liverpool's F1 games, well, certainly my experience with their F1 games at least, and the weather system is far less ever-changing. That is until I played Formula 1 2003, which has a great dynamic forecast weather system, which I dare say could give some of Cody's F1 games weather systems a run for their money. So why aren't I using the forecast weather option? Well, it's partly because I try to replicate the weather for the real life Grand Prix in each of my reverse grid videos, but it's also because if I were to use the forecast weather option and the weather were to change mid-race, then everyone would come into the pits to change tyres. That is where the problem lies. The pits in this game are bugged, or at least they are for me. I can't work out how much of what I'm about to show you is genuinely in the game and how much of it can be attributed to my scratch disc / failing PS2. The one thing which I do know is in the game and isn't dependent on my disc or my PS2 is how the cars exit the pits on some of the circuits. So take Albert Park in Australia. The race started off dry and then it started raining. Of course, drivers start coming into the pits. 90% of the time, it's not the entering of the pits that's the issue, it's the exiting. Because 1 minute you're taking the race lead due to your teammates coming into the pits first, and then the next, you're piling into the back of Jenson Button at a closing speed of probably around 150 miles an hour. The problem is a combination of cars remaining on their pits limiters far longer than they need to, combined with the fact that, at Albert Park at least, they don't stay within the pit exit lines when they rejoin the track. Instead, they steer sharply straight into the racing line, whilst they are only just accelerating from the pit limiter, and everyone else is going at about 180 to 190 miles an hour. As you can imagine, this breeds chaos, and I'm sure you'll be seeing just some of the crashes and incidents that I was able to capture. I mentioned that I think my disc for this game is scratched, but I know that doesn't relate to this. This is genuinely how the pit stops work around this circuit on this game, and I've seen this happen on other people's YouTube videos. The danger of the pit exit varies from circuit to circuit. At Albert Park, we've already seen what can and does happen when cars exit the pits. However, at Sepang, with the track being wider, the cars that exit the pits, even though they stick on the pit limiter for far too long and still steer sharply to the left again, they don't go so far as to rejoin the racing line. So the start-finish straight crashes you saw in Australia are, albeit narrowly, avoided in Malaysia. However, that is only one part of the pit stop drama on this game, because what you are about to witness was one of the first things I saw when I got to this game about a year ago, and it is truly extraordinary. Again, please do let me know if this is a genuine part of the game or whether this is just due to my scratched copy, because I would be surprised if this is a genuine glitch in the game. So imagine this. I'm in the middle of a reverse grid Malaysian Grand Prix, and due to the forecast weather option being selected, the rain has stopped, the track is dried up, and so all the drivers start to come into the pits. Well, that was the idea. The problem is with that final point. The drivers, instead of coming into the pits, all congregated in the middle of the final corner just before the pit entry. It started off with just Mark Webber, who parked his car facing the pit entry but not moving into it. That then held up Barrichello and Frentzen, and then those three ended up catching and holding up a lot more people. Also, the stupid thing is that Mark Webber, the man who started the pile-up, did move into the pits once enough cars crashed into each other and nudged him far forward enough so that he was considered to be in the pit entry and then drove into the pits. It was honestly ridiculous. So Mark Webber ended up going into the pits eventually. Barrichello and Frentzen were never pushed forward enough to be motivated to enter the pits. So because they never moved, it meant Montoya never moved, neither did both McLarens, neither did Fernando Alonso, and the list just goes on and on. This whole situation is absurd, but this happened to me when I first booted up the game, and I was, after a few hours, able to replicate and capture it. The brilliant thing is that this doesn't end here. Oh, this is just the start of a much weirder problem. The strange thing is that once a driver gets caught up in a pile-up like that, they are sort of retired. So you can see the drivers I am able to spectate jump straight from Heidfeld, now in second place, straight to Jarno Trulli, and he is the only one in that car park that has moved after the initial impact and thus was considered to be the only one running, and so the only one I could spectate. Actually, I could spectate people at the back of the pile-up, probably because they were the newest drivers to get stuck. But once they were stationary for a while, they were considered to have retired and thus couldn't be watched. You may think this is like how it is, or certainly used to be, on Codemasters F1 games. If you've ever watched any Last Man Standing challenge video, then you'll know what I mean. Once a driver retires, or after they've been standing still for a while, so then they are considered to have retired, they then will despawn after a few seconds. Well, this functions in a similar way, except the retired cars don't always disappear. In fact, I can't even verify that the cars have actually retired. So this meant that the race leader, Antonio Pizzonia, yes, he was the race leader partly due to the reverse starting grids and partly due to the last corner chaos, ended up getting stuck in the pile-up and thus got himself retired. Nick Heidfeld, second in the running order, found a gap in the traffic and so survived and took the race lead. Jarno Trulli, the only driver to escape the last corner catastrophe, also found a gap in the traffic and so took second place in the race. Mark Webber, as karma for causing this situation in the first place, got caught up in the traffic, ground to a halt, and became the latest driver to retire. With 11 laps completed, albeit by only 2 drivers, this preposterous list of non-runners was brought up. 9 drivers were defined as having retired, 8 of them due to this mess, and the other one being Michael Schumacher, who actually retired in the old-fashioned way. But 9 retirees plus 2 remaining runners leaves 9 drivers unaccounted for. Well, they were still parked on the final corner. It's strange that Webber, Button, Ralf Schumacher and Raikkonen were all declared as retiring and so their cars despawned. Even though Jacques Villeneuve, Fernando Alonso, Cristiano Di Matta, Justin Wilson, David Coulthard, Antonio Pizzonia, Juan Pablo Montoya, Heinz-Harald Frentzen and even Rubens Barrichello are still stationary on the final corner and are still deemed as being in the race. I can't go on board and watch them, and there is no way for me to do anything with them. Yet, they are still deemed as running in the Grand Prix, even though they aren't moving. Sure, most of them have little space to move, but Jacques Villeneuve has plenty of room to set off, yet he is still sat there. It's probably because the pit entry is blocked and he wants to get into the pits. So then, if they all want to go into the pits, then why don't they? Especially Barrichello, who was blocked by Webber originally, but now Webber isn't there, so why doesn't he just move? Or rewinding even further, why did Webber stop on his way into the pits in the first place? For the rest of the race, it was just Nick Heidfeld versus Jarno Trulli. They were both able to find a gap through the parked cars lap after lap, and that is how they became the only two guys to be left running come the end of the Grand Prix. The worrying thing is that in the final few laps, it started to rain again, and I wondered whether either of them were going to come into the pits. Because if they tried to pit, then they would have ended up in the train of cars, got stuck, and then nobody would have finished this Grand Prix. Intriguingly, it also poses the question as to who I could have spectated, because if Heidfeld and Trulli retired or just ended up like the other 9 drivers who are still at the final corner, then I wouldn't have been able to have spectated them, as I can't spectate any of those who have parked it or any of those who have formerly retired. So if I couldn't have spectated Heidfeld or Trulli anymore, what would I have been watching? Due to Trulli getting caught up in the final corner traffic jam, Nick had a huge lead, and so he ended up winning the Grand Prix with Jarno Trulli in second, despite the fact that Jarno was 2 seconds a lap faster, which, amazingly, is the most believable and plausible part of this video. The thing is though, is that until the top 8 cross the line, the race just keeps going and going and going. On the 20th lap in this 19-lap race, Nick Heidfeld and Jarno Trulli crossed the line side by side, but Heidfeld still crossed the line first. Just over 2 laps after the race ended, Jarno Trulli finally overtook Nick Heidfeld, and then the laps just kept rolling on by. That is until, after a long while, something did happen. The results screen never came up, and those 9 drivers never left the circuit. So something had to give. In the end, it was Jarno Trulli who stopped on circuit a mere 21 minutes and nearly 14 whole laps after the pre-agreed race distance was completed. Then, 15 laps after the race should have ended, Nick Heidfeld also stopped running. Presumably both guys ran out of fuel, but why would they have between 13 and 15 laps worth of spare fuel in the first place? That's nearly the whole race distance again. That is that. The final moment in a race that never ended. It could never have ended unless another 6 people crossed the line. Until all of the point places are decided, the game never ends a race. Amazingly, I did see a similar Grand Prix in Australia. There was a race where people entered the pits but never exited. I presume it was similar to what happened in Malaysia, but because the pit entry is largely hidden behind a wall, I couldn't see what happened, so I just have to assume that there were cars congregating before the pit limiter line. I couldn't see them, but either way, for whatever reason, because if it isn't that, then it's even more baffling as to why only 7 people finished the Grand Prix. Yes, that's right. Everyone came into the pits, and then come the end, there were only 7 runners. Most people never left the pits. And so, because there were only 7 runners left at the end, that's 1 fewer than the game needs to end a race. So, again, that was another race which never ended and never could end. Anyway, this whole situation where drivers don't enter the pits, has it ever happened for anyone else? I wonder if this is a genuine glitch in the game, or whether it's just a unique side effect due to my scratched disc or potentially dying PS2. If anyone knows, then please do let me know. All I know is that this glitch isn't exactly a common occurrence. I haven't played this game a lot. Hell, I haven't even spectated a race at even half the circuits in this game yet. But all I do know is that this final corner pileup at Malaysia has only ever happened to me twice. One of those times being when I first got the game, and the other one being the one that I recorded and I was deliberately trying to record it. When the car's disappearing glitch occurred in Australia, it only happened that one time. I tried for a few hours to replicate it so I could record it for this video, but it never happened again. Similarly, it took me about 3 hours to replicate the Malaysia cars getting stuck on the final corner glitch. I don't know how many circuits this mass car retirement pit glitch can happen, or even fully understand why it happens, or even how it happens in Australia. But all I do know is that it can, albeit only rarely, happen. The final part to this video is the earlier pit exit issue, but this time at Monaco. As you can imagine, with a circuit that is even narrower than Albert Park, coupled with the same extended pit limiter issue, along with the cars rejoining the racing line sharply and early, you can imagine what destruction can be caused here. Granted, it doesn't always happen, and sometimes the cars coming down the start-finish straight can react and swerve out of the way of the cars exiting the pits. Having said that, this is an unavoidable issue if you do a 100% distance race. In the clips I recorded in Australia and Malaysia, I used the forecast weather option to get the cars to pit. In the final circuit in which I recorded at Monte Carlo, I didn't even use a change in weather to get the drivers to pit. If the race is long enough, the drivers will pit regardless. So you've heard me explain how this all works and the extremes of the pit stop glitches. But if you want these glitches condensed down to their raw forms, then here is a quick montage of all of the pit stop related crashes I recorded at only 3 of the 16 different circuits on the 2003 calendar. And that is pretty much that. I have said and shown pretty much all I need to regarding this glitch. If you can shed any light on these glitches, or if you've had your own experiences, then please do leave them down in the comments. The final thing I do want to show you is part of the reason why I think at least part of what I showed you in this video wasn't normal game behaviour. That's because once I exited out of the replays for some of the crashes in the first 2 Monaco recordings, the game just froze. On the third occasion, the disc stopped spinning in my PS2 mid-race, which meant the game was just running off of the PS2's RAM. That was enough to keep the cars going out on circuit, but not enough to keep the commentators talking or all of the engine sounds going. Just listen to Button's car once the disc stops spinning. So since the game was running on what was in the RAM, I daren't view a replay, especially after viewing replays caused the game to crash the 2 previous times. The weird thing is that at a random point mid-race, after about 25 minutes of minimal game sound, the PS2 decided all on its own to spin the disc again, and so the game spluttered back to full working order.
Ferrari's Michael Schumacher has just set the fastest lap.
The weather has been absolutely brilliant so far, and we've had the weather has been absolutely brilliant so far, and we've had the weather has been absolutely brilliant so far, and we've had the weather but glorious sunshine up till now. The track conditions are close to perfect, and not a cloud in sight.
So whilst I don't know how much of this video was caused by the condition of my Formula 1 2003 disc, it certainly does seem like Monaco on my game is a bit dodgy for whatever reason. Much like how I used to have a copy of Gran Turismo 3 that froze when I tried to do the license tests. I think my copy of the game isn't working fully, but at the same time, I still think most of what I've shown you in this video could happen in your copy of the game. But as I said earlier, if you can shed any light on these glitches, or if you have any experiences with these glitches, especially on any circuits other than Albert Park, Sepang and Monte Carlo, then be sure to leave them down in the comments. And so with all that said, I'll see you guys in my next video, which I believe will be the reverse grid race around Monaco. Who will win around Monaco in a 33% distance race with the starting grid of the real-life Grand Prix reversed? Well, to find out, then be sure to watch part 7 in my Formula 1 2003 reverse grid race series. And I'll see you guys there.